Welcome students to this class on ethics and values. As you know, in this class we are studying about, in this entire semester we are going through the women institution and practices. In this context, let me first introduce myself. I am Professor Navaneeta Rath. I teach sociology at Utkal University. Today's session will be devoted to discuss on women and property rights and how, whether we give property rights to the women or not, and how justified and the practices that we are having in relation to property rights, are they ethically sound or not? That will be the entire discussion of today's class. तेणु आज आमे महिला एवं तांकर संपत्ति अधिकार विषय रे पढ़िबा। ए जो महिला एवं संपत्ति अधिकार को नेकी आमर कौन कौन प्रचलित प्रथा रही, सेही प्रथा केते दूर एक्चुअली जदि नैतिकता दृष्टिकोण रो देखिबा ताहा युक्तिसंगत कि नुहे, सेही विषय रे आज आमे आलोचना करिबा। एई परिप्रेक्षी रे I want to tell you in this context that let us first of all discuss what do we mean by property. By property simply we can say what I own, जोटा मु निजे ताकू मोर ओनरशिप बा अधिकार अछि बोली भाबे ताकू मु प्रॉपर्टी कहे. So any material thing that I own is my property, and ownership of asset allows to have an economic secure life. When I have ownership on certain material things and I feel that I have an economically secure life in this society, जेतेबेले मोर संपत्ति उपरे किछि अधिकार मु साब्यस्त करि पारे, सेतेबेले मु भाबे जे समाज रे मु एक सुरक्षित स्थानर अधिकारी अटे. कारण as you know, property is something that not only gives us prestige, that not only gives us position, but that also secures us in the society. अनेक समय रे महिला मानन को आमे देखि थाउ जो मानकर कि हठात किछि स्वामी चली जाई थांती एवं सेमाने किपरि हैरान हेई थांती. जदि तांकर किछि संपत्ति उपरे अधिकार थाए सेतेबेले सेमाने निजको अधिक सुरक्षित मने करंती. तुमे समस्ते जानिथिबो, दिस मे बी the experience of each one of you. So taking this into consideration, Article 17 जो यूनिवर्सल डिक्लेरेशन ऑफ ह्यूमन राइट्स and Article 13 to 16 of the Convention on Elimination of all forms of discriminations against women, they say that both men and women have right to property. तेणु उभय आमर जो यूनिवर्सल डिक्लेरेशन ऑफ ह्यूमन राइट्स आमर जो होची आमे मानविक अधिकार जो आमर रही संदर्भ बा डिक्लेरेशन सेथिरे जो घोषणानामा तार होची धारा 17 एवं जो सीड जोटा को आमे कहूचे which was actually adopted by the United Nations in 1979. 13 to 16 articles, they talk about property rights, and they not only give property rights to women, they say property rights is the equal right of both men and women. उभय पुरुष एवं स्त्री संपत्तिर अधिकार तांकर रहिबा आवश्यक अटे. And women's property rights are also, they are ingrained in the Millennium Development Goal, and the Millennium Development Goal, particularly goal number 1 and goal number 3, they talk about property rights of women. Millennium Development Goal ro आर्टिकल 1 धारा 1 एवं 3 रे हमर जो ऑब्जेक्टिव रही सेथिरे अछि वुमेन मानकर प्रॉपर्टी राइट रहिबा आवश्यक. दे से दैट प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स आर एक्चुअली ह्यूमन राइट्स. जो आमे संपत्ति भित्तिक अधिकार विषय रे कहूचे ताहा मानविक अधिकार अटे. ଯେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ କୌଣସି ନାରୀଙ୍କୁ ସମ୍ପତ୍ତିରୁ ଆମେ ତାଙ୍କର ଅଧିକାର ଦେଉନାହିଁ ସେତେବେଳେ ଆମେ ଭାବିବା that they are deprived of their human rights and but କିନ୍ତୁ ଏତେ ପରେ ମଧ୍ୟ we have got very good provisions to ensure property rights for women. It's a very welcome step not only in the country but also the international society आंतर्जातिक स्तर रे महिला मानकर संपत्ति अधिकार उपरे अनेक गुड़िए आलोचना हेची एवं से आलोचना मध्य तांकु जो अधिकार दबार कागज कलम रे प्रतिफलित मध्य होईची in all the important documents. 3 documents we have talked about. First is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second one is the CEDAW that was passed in 1979 and the third one is the Millennium Development Goal that we were having since 2001 sethere goal 1 out 3 re heichi. Kintu now the question arises, do all women of this world, of this society have property rights? Students, you are the right observers. You can tell whether you find the women who are around you, whether they are your sisters, they are your mothers, they are your grandmothers, do they have property rights? You ask to yourself, because this is nothing new. You can tell from your experience that whether we have given equal property rights to the women or not. In this context, I will tell you, in many countries, irrespective of such nice international declarations, and most of the nations are signatories to that, semane sethire tankara साक्षर प्रदान प्रत्येक जनराष्ट्र से साक्षर प्रदान करिचंती राष्ट्र माने तापरे मध्य इट इज सीन दैट एबे मध्य बहुत देश रे बिकॉज ऑफ सम नॉर्म्स religious traditions, social customs jogu women are deprived of their property rights, and for a long time India was also one of them. Amar rashtra bharat madhya एथिरे स्वाक्षर नामा करिथिले मध्य बहुत दिन जाई इंडिया रे women were not getting property rights by law, so it came very late, but in law now in India also women have their property rights as their male partners. And according to UN Habitat, 1 in 4 developing countries have laws that prevent women from owning property. 4टी देश मध्यरु गोटिए विकासशील देश रे आजि मध्य नारीटीए तार सो संपत्तिर अधिकार पाई न थाए कहीं ना आमर जो प्रचलित प्रथा अच्छी आमर जो धार्मिक प्रथा अच्छी बा धार्मिक नियम अच्छी जेते आमे नियम कले मध्य सेमानंकर दे हैव सच अ स्ट्रॉन्ग ग्रिप ऑन आवर सोसाइटी. दे प्रिवेंट वुमेन because they do not see men and women as equal. They think that property is a male monopoly. semane bhabanti eita hochi exclusively it is a right of the men. पुरुष मानक पुरुष प्राधान्य देश मानकरे एबे मध्य चिंताधारा होउची बहुत तांकर हमर जो सामाजिक प्रथा रहिची हमर जो धार्मिक नियम सब रहिची the property means it is associated with men and women are deprived of their property right. एटा होची मानसिकता स्तर रे एवं मध्य हमर परिवर्तन आसी नाही. Until unless we have a changed mindset, we are not in a position to accord property rights to the women. Even today, property is always in the names of fathers and or in the names of husband. आपण माने तुमे माने तुम घर मानकरे देखुथबो जदि घरटीए गाड़ीटीए किंबा कोनोसी दामिकिया आसबाब पत्र रो मालिक किए बोली हम पचारू बापांक नारे ताहा थाए. तेणु जे गोटे घरे गोटे स्वामी नारे थाए गोटे बापा नारे थाए एंड प्रॉपर्टी एक्चुअली बहुत कम जगह आमे देखिबा नारी मानक नारे प्रॉपर्टी थाए बा नारी माने प्रॉपर्टी रो सत्वाधिकारी बोली आमे ग्रहण करिथाउ जदि आमे भारतर केस देखिबा इफ वी लुक इनटू द इंडियन सिनारियो एंड अराउंड 87.3% ऑफ वुमेन आर डिपेंडेंट ऑन एग्रीकल्चर गोटे बहुत सुंदर ये आमे देखिबा परिसंख्यान जो थे 87.3% women are dependent on agriculture because agriculture is a primary livelihood for many women of the country. किंतु जदि आमे से नारी मान को पचारिबा तुम मानक मध्यरु जमी केते जनक नारे अछि केते जनक among you people how many of you actually own the land. The statistics says that only 10.34% women have a command over land. The land is in their names. जमा जेतेबेले और प्राय 87% नारी माने बा महिला माने कृषि उपरे निर्भरशील किंतु कृषि जमी उपरे तांकर अधिकार न थाए. They only provide labor force to our agricultural fields but they do not own it. You might have seen that in your families आमे आसंतु आम निज परिवार कथा चिंता करिबा जदि पुराना दिन को आमे चली जिबा अतीत को आमे देखिबा झियो मानकर कौनसी बापा माँ प्रॉपर्टी रे कौनसी अधिकार रहु नथिला. मो अतीत कथा कहूची वर्तमान किंतु नियम सेया नुहे. अतीत रे आमे झियो मानकर बापा माँ प्रॉपर्टी उपरे कौनसी अधिकार रहु नथिला. जो माने भौणी माने घरर थिले सेमाने केतेबेले रहुथिले दे वेयर एट द मर्सी ऑफ देयर ब्रदर्स. तांका भाई मानक नारे रहुथिला. अनवेड सिस्टर जदि रहुथिले आउ तांकर बापा मानकर देहांत परे प्रॉपर्टी भाई ना को आसला किंतु भौणीटीए से प्रॉपर्टी रे पाउ नथिला. सेहीपरि मैरिड women had almost no rights on the parental property and widows invariably they were staying at the mercy of their sons and other male members in the in-laws family. जदि गोटे नारी बाहा हो जाउथिला सेतेबेले कोन होतला ना तार आउ प्रॉपर्टी रे कोनसी भाग रहु नथला. अनमैरिड थिला र कथा अलगा मैरिड हैला पर रहु नथला. आउ जदि गोटे झियो वैधव्य प्राप्त होउथिला if she was getting widowhood she was at the mercy of the sons or the other male members of the family. Property tanare raunatla. In this situation can you think about how they were, how insecure they might be feeling. semane प्रत्येक कथा पाई तांकर पुरुष जो घरे थिले पुरुष लोक तांकर दया उपरे निर्भर करुथिले. So that was actually increasing a very bad plight for the women. तेणु ता द्वारा नारी मानकर समस्या अधिकरु अधिक होउथिला. किंतु एई सब चिंता देखला परे एई सब प्रथा आमे देखुचे प्रॉपर्टी गोटे very important thing. Property is a important component that can really empower women. कारण प्रॉपर्टी जदि संपत्ति उपरे जेतेबेले गोटे नारी रो अधिकार आसे तार सुरक्षा बढ़ी चले कारण तार जो स्टाटस बा परिस्थिति आमे जाको कहूचु परिवार बा समाज रे बढ़े. कारण इन आवर सोसाइटी वी गिव प्रेस्टीज ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ आवर ओनरशिप ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी. जहाँ ना रे संपत्ति थाए आमे ताकू अनेक अनेक सम्मान देई थाउ. एहा कोन ठीक की. तेनु जदि आमे प्रॉपर्टी के नै सम्मान देई थाउ नारी रो अधिकार रहिबा के नाही सेटा आमे चिंता करिबा. Then second is to eradicate their property if they will be having property. आमे जो कहूँ नारी माने गरीब they do not have they suffer from poverty and if you see the proportion of women in comparison to men, women bear the disproportionate burden of poverty in our society. आउ जेतेबेले तांकर प्रॉपर्टी न थाए सेमाने अधिकरु अधिक हिंसार शिकार होंती. तेनु हिंसा जेतेबेले बढ़ी चले they cannot lead a healthy life in the society. तुमे गोटे घरे देख दुईटी घरर तमे उदाहरण नियो. You just take the example of two households. In one household the woman is earning. The woman keeps the earning with her and she is the and she is treated as one among the breadwinners of the family. Here what happens, the domestic violence, the घरोई हिंसा जोटा को कहूचे तापरे कमी जाए, आमे ताको बहुत स्टाटस दो कारण ता सी होउची संपत्तिर मालिक, सी घर पई रोजगार करची, गोटे घरे जने रोजगार करूनी गोटे माँ, आमे सेते बेले ताको कहू तार रोजगार नाही, से अन्य मानक उपरे निर्भरशील बोली कहू, किंतु आमे या परे बहुत आलोचना करचे. We have got series of, we have already undertaken series of discussion on them. We know whether women work or not, whether women are generating income or not, and therefore land and property ownership empowers women and therefore provide them an income and security. केवल तांको गोटे अर्थ उपार्जन बाट देखायनी, तांको मध्य सुरक्षा प्रदान करता है. So property is very important from the to enhance the status of women, number one. Number two, to prevent them from domestic violence. Number three, to provide them security and to just eradicate poverty among them. And women's lack of property rights brings a whole bundle of issues for them. जेतेबेले गोटे नारी रो संपत्ति न थाए, सेही नारी अधिक असुरक्षित मन करे, सेही नारी उपरे हिंसा अधिक बढ़ी चले एवं से सारा जीवन गोटे सुस्थ जीवन समाज रे से निर्वाह करि पारे नाही. So taking all these things into account, we will be discussing what does property right means and property rights include the legal right to acquire, own, transfer and sell property. चारिटा जिनस दरकार आईनगत बा आईन सम्मत अनुसारे it should be legally backed, they should be legally backed up to acquire. They should acquire a part of the property of their parents or their husbands in the society. Then the second thing is that they can own the property. ସେମାନେ ତାଙ୍କ ନାଁରେ ମଧ୍ୟ ଘର କରିପାରିବେ, ଗାଡ଼ି କରିପାରିବେ, ଆସବାବପତ୍ର କରିପାରିବେ. ଦେ ସୁଡ୍ ହ୍ୟାଭ୍ ଦ ରାଇଟ୍ ଟୁ ଟ୍ରାନ୍ସଫର୍ ପ୍ରପର୍ଟି. ସେମାନେ ଚାହିଁଲେ ପ୍ରପର୍ଟିଟିକୁ ବିକି ମଧ୍ୟ ପାରିବେ. କିନ୍ତୁ ବହୁତ ସମୟରେ ଆମେ ନାରୀମାନଙ୍କୁ ପ୍ରପର୍ଟିଟେ ଓନ୍ କରିବା ପାଇଁ, ପ୍ରପର୍ଟିଟେ ତାକୁ ଆକ୍ୱାୟାର କରିବା ପାଇଁ, ଇନହେରିଟ୍ କରିବା ପାଇଁ ବା ପ୍ରପର୍ଟିଟେ ଆମେ ବିକ୍ରି କରିବା ପାଇଁ ତାଙ୍କୁ ସୁଯୋଗ ଦେଇନଥାଉ. ଇଟ୍ ଅଲସୋ ଏମ୍ପାୱାର୍ସ ଅ ପର୍ସନ୍ ଟୁ କିପ୍ ୱାନ୍ସ ଓନ୍ ୱେଜେସ୍. ଆମେ ବହୁତ ସମୟରେ ଦେଖୁ, ବହୁତ ଘରମାନଙ୍କରେ ୟୁ ମାଇଟ୍ ହାଭ୍ ସିନ୍ that women do earn. They get a salary or a remuneration for their household, but they only bring it till the house. After that they are taken to the names of their husbands. So all these things, even when we are having cash transfer, the cash is transferred to the names of the beneficiary women, but many times it is the husband who operates the bank account, who actually uses the money at his sweet will. The women hardly have any right over this money, and therefore they can also property right, they can collect rent. गोटे घर अच्छी, गोटे घरे जनेकर गोटे घर बा जमी अच्छी, तापरे जो भड़ा आसे ताकू मध्य कलेक्ट करिवार राइट रहिबो. एंड women in different capacities actually need property right. Women actually, we can see women in from different angles. What are they as married or unmarried daughter. Married daughter जेपरी property पाइबो, unmarried daughter केवल property right नहीं, married हेले मध्य ताकू property right मिलिबा दरकार. The second thing is that as married or deserted wife, विवाहिता महिला हेले जे केवल संपत्ति और अधिकारिणी हबो ता माने नाही. If they are also deserted by their husband, divorced by their husband, छाड़पत्र देले मध्य ताकू प्रॉपर्टी राइट दबा दरकार. नहले से जीवनटे धारण करिवो केमती. अनेक समय छाड़पत्र पाइला परे महिलाटी ता शिशु को धरी रही थाए, सेतेबेले से निजको बहुत असुरक्षित मन करे जदि तार कोनोसी इंडिपेंडेंट income न थाए. So at that point of time they should we should think about that, and they should be also given property right. And as mothers and widowed women also, mother tie hele bi, because the mother is the sole manager of the family, she has to decide and she has to invest for her children's education, for children's health, for nutrition, for buying the essential things to the house. So they should have the property right, and they should be given the opportunity to use their own judgment to how to sell, how to acquire, how to transfer all these things. And widowed ladies require property. बहुत समय रे आमे देखु विधवा स्त्री लोक माननकु property right आमे देई न थाउ. At that point of time they are thoroughly exploited by the family members. So therefore if they will be having property right, after a few days of grief they can become independent, they can invest, they can have their own earning in the family, so that they can have a dignified life. So property actually adds to the dignity. Number two, it brings equality among both men and women. And the third thing is that it also gives justice to the women, because they can have a life of their own and for their children. And number four is that it increases their status. Number five is that it helps a lot in women's empowerment. So property right is a must, and even now people who are in live-in relations, because जो माने तांकर संपर्क रे बंचुचंती सेमाने विवाहित नुहंती, किंतु सेमाने मध्य तांकर मध्य प्रॉपर्टी राइट रहिछि बोली एबे आमे कहूचे. आमे जदि भारतीय प्रथारे इफ वी लुक इनटू द इंडियन लीगल सिस्टम, आईनगत प्रथारे बा आईन व्यवस्था रे आमे देखिबा, Indian laws are also favorable for women's property right. Though it came little late, but Indian law is not very much negative to women's property right. But the thing is that law has got very good intents. Law रो सबु बळे उद्देश्य अति महत् थाए, but we have to translate it into implementation or action. आमर दायित्व बा कर्तव्य होची एई जो law रो provision रहिची, the provisions that have been laid down by law, we have to implement it. And for that implementation we need a changed attitude, changed mindset. Our practices need to change. And my dear students, I want to tell you, you are the young people who can not only change your attitude, but you are the people who can realize, who can understand. After such discussions, you can bring a change in your family, in your surrounding members, among your peers. You yourself become a practitioner, so that you become a role model for others, and you can be the steward for the change in the society. So when we are discussing about the Indian laws and the property, women's property rights in the Indian legal system, I have written so many laws, and we will be discussing them one by one. The Indian Succession Act 1925 was the first act relating to property right passed during the colonial era. जेतेबळे ब्रिटिश राजत्व थिला 1925 मसियारे फॉर द फर्स्ट टाइम गोटे प्रॉपर्टी लॉ हेतिला, तार ना थिला इंडियन सक्सेशन एक्ट बा भारतीय अधिकारी आईन, जो थिरे कि जो सत्वाधिकार प्रॉपर्टी बा संपत्ति रो सत्वाधिकार विषय रे एही एक्ट कहिथिला. ए जो दिस एक्ट हाउएवर वाज साइलेंट अबाउट वुमेन्स प्रॉपर्टी राइट, किंतु ए एक्ट रो गोटे दुखद घटना हेउची, दिस एक्ट डिडंट स्पीक anything about women's property right. It was only talking about inheritance, and it didn't talk about how women, what is the position of women, how women can actually own property or inherit property. But this was there were some good things in the act, but this act was actually overridden by the customary laws of the community relating to property right. British Rajatwa samayre what happened, India had a very plural system as we are having today. During those times also plurality was there. So every community, I will say, it's every community had its own customary law. प्रत्येक गोष्ठी निजर किछि प्रथा रही ट्रेडिशनल कस्टमरी लॉज जो दीज लॉज एक्चुअली वे रेनिंग सुप्रीम ओवर द इंडियन द सक्सेशन एक्ट दैट वाज पास्ड इन 1925. सो द सक्सेशन एक्ट डिडंट हैव मच सक्सेस इन इंडिया एंड रीजन ब्रॉट डिफरेंसेस इन कस्टमरी लॉज. प्रत्येक जो कस्टमरी लॉज प्रत्येक अंचल अंचल भैरी करता. There were regional variations in the customary laws, and therefore inheritance was actually, there was no standardized inheritance law in the country. So inheritance was based on the religion as well as the regions were concerned. दुईटी जिनस गोटे हूँ धार्मिक प्रथा आउ गोटे हूँ आंचलिक प्रथा मध्य द्वारा जो इनहेरिटेंस बा सत्वाधिकार डिसाइड होता. सो आवर सक्सेशन वाज डिसाइडेड मोर बाय द रीजन्स, बाय द कस्टमरी लॉज दैट वेर प्रेवलेंट इन पर्टिकुलर रीजन. एंड द सेकंड थिंग वाज द religious personal laws. They were also deciding, because in many religions there were the personal laws, they were talking about property rights, and they were not that much favorable to women's property rights. And however, the laws for the Hindu women were also applicable to the Jains, Sikhs and Buddhist community. जो Jain, Sikh एवं Buddhist, they were adopting the Hindu laws. And so far as regions are concerned, Islamic माने Islamic law द्वारा तांका property कथा decide करथिले, हिंदू मानक ये रे Sikh, Jain and Buddhist माने governed होते. So what happened, so far as the regions are concerned, चारिटा region कथा मु कहबी जो थे कि चारि प्रकार रो law रही थिला. गोटे थिला दयाभागा law जोटा कि बेंगल आउ in the eastern. This Dayabhaga law was relating to property. It was a customary law developed from the customs of the eastern India, and this law also was जो eastern India रो जो ये Bengal particularly बंगीय province बा province रे यह बेसिकी विशेष भाव रे व्यवहृत होउतला. The second one was the Mayukha law, which was actually prevalent in the western part of India. मयूखर जो थिला कस्टमरी लॉ सेटा प्रॉपर्टी रो भाग बंटन बा बंटन डिसाइड करथला. एंड दिस वाज प्रेवलेंट कोटी कोटी ना एटा बॉम्बे, कोंकण आउ गुजरात एई अंचल रे एई मयूख लॉटा ये होथला. The third law was the Marumakatayam law, जोटा कि नंबुद्री केरल जो थिले फार साउथ रे सेमानक मध्यरे केरल जो लोक मान थिले तांको एई लॉ रे सेमाने तांकर प्रॉपर्टी बंटन होतला, संपत्ति बंटन विभाजन. एंड द मिताक्षर लॉ वाज प्रेवलेंट इन अदर पार्ट्स ऑफ इंडिया. भारतर अन्य भाग रे सब मिताक्षर लॉ थिला प्रेवलेंट. सो दिस कस्टमरी लॉज नेवर क्लियरली spelled out about women's property right. All these customary laws were actually patriarchal in character. They never talked about women's property right. Actually in 1937, the Hindu Women's Right to Property Act was passed by the British government. The Hindu Women's Property Right प्रथमे 12 वर्ष परे 1925 परे British सरकार से आनिले. And this act was for the first time conferred rights for the of succession to the Hindu widow beyond स्त्री धन. बाहागर बेले जो स्त्री धन दिया होतला ता व्यतिरके हिंदू विधवा माने प्रॉपर्टी ग्रहण करि परिबे बोली एहा प्रथम थर पई कहिला. So this is, we will take up from this part and we will go to the next thing, how the legal system has evolved to give rights to the women property rights and where we stand now. Thank you.